Hello, this is Peter Merrick. I'm a Canadian in exile. No, I'm just joking. I'm just in San Diego right now, and it's overcast, so don't feel envious because it's not so great out. I met Kim Moody. Oh my God. I joined STEP, the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, back in 2008. And there was the big stage. It was second day, and only really special, smart, super scary, smart people got to be on the stage to ask CRA the questions that every accountant and lawyer and anyone dealing with wealth in Canada would, want to be on. He was there with Michael Kadetsky, Paul LeBrew. And what really impressed me, and I want everyone to know this, Kim changed my life. You did. You changed my life. You did something so courageous. And I want to share this before you share your story. So Kim is a leader in the tax community. People turn to Kim. However, most people there, being a leader, they haven't really deserved it. Well, Kim did something courageous back in 2017. When the federal government decided to drastically change how small business was taxed, people who had made sacrifices to build the economy, Kim stepped forward and became a leader for the tax community, for the business community. He put his money where his mouth was. He went to all the major tax centers, cities in Canada to educate people. And I never watched, what do we call it, CPAC in Canada, like the television thing. I watched Kim give his presentation, and Kim, you were good, but the guy who spoke just before you or after you, he was scary. Wolfson?
Wolfson, I can't remember the guy's first name, the academic guy.
He was an academic. Unfortunately, he knew the dark arts of tax, and he hates people who made it possible for him to have a pension and a job. He literally hated people. So Kim, if you can share your story about you're a CA, CPA, a fellow CPA, FCA. I got it right?
Yep.
And I'm really excited. We've known each other for a long time, but I'm looking forward to this dialogue. So if you can share your background from where you started and how you got here and why you feel it's important to speak out, because nobody else in your profession speaks out on LinkedIn.
Sure, no, happy to. Just to be, there are other people that speak out, but I've certainly got my fair share of attention in terms of speaking out. So I'm an accountant by background, as you know, and I've been an accountant. I think I got my letters in '94. So it's a long time ago already. But I always had a keen interest in tax. I wasn't much of an accountant. And I always had I wanted to go to law school. But I also wanted to start my own practice. And I also wanted to start a family. And so I had lots of things on my to-do list. So my wife and I started our family 4 years after we got married. So we had our first child in '96, and I started my own practice in '94. The current version of the practice that I have is.
And the name of the firm?
Name of the firm today is it's Moody's Private Client Law, because we have a law firm, and then as part of that law firm we have Moody's Tax, which is fairly well known in the tax community for being tax specialists on the legal side and accounting side for private clients. And so we have Moody's Private Client, which offers tax law, both on the Canada-US side, and then trust and estate law, immigration law, and US law, including renouncing US citizens, which is a fairly large business of ours. And then we have a traditional accounting firm, which I lead as well, and it's called Moody's Private Client LLP, and that focuses on private clients, high net worth private clients, and their filing needs both on Canada and the US. So the elements of my practice, and this go back to '94, and along the way I achieved leadership positions in the tax community, mainly because I wanted to give back. I was so thankful for the great and wonderful career that the profession had given me, and in all the wonderful learning. And I like to consider myself intellectually curious. So great institutions that provide for learning, like the Canadian Tax Foundation. And so I was fortunate to become the chairman of the Canadian Tax Foundation in 2012, and then chairman of the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners in 2009 to 2011, and then the co-chair of the Joint Committee on Taxation between the Canadian Bar Association and CPA Canada, and that was from 2016 to 2018. So in the midst of this kerfuffle that happened, large kerfuffle, when the Liberals introduced a package of proposals on July 18th, 2017, that were very, very damaging, as you already alluded to, Peter. I was in a bit of a pickle, right? Because the professional and personal side of me looked at these proposals, and I've told this story many times. I don't know if you've heard it, Peter, but I was literally, when the package was released on July 18th, 2017, I was on a family holiday with my wife and two youngest kids, and I was walking on Main Street on Niagara on the Lake. Have you ever been to Niagara on the Lake?
I'm Torontonian, of course. Look. I put this on for today because this is for my Canadian audience, this talk.
So you know how beautiful it is, right?
Gorgeous.
That's a beautiful, beautiful spot, and Main Street tourism place. And I was literally walking down the street when my phone blew up, and I thought, and my kids and my wife were going to get some ice cream. And so I thought, I'm just going to sit down here and take a look at what happened. So I started scrolling on my iPhone, and I could not believe what I was reading. And so I was pretty upset, kind of ruined the rest of my holiday. And on the way back on the plane, I took a deep dive into what was there. And I was thoroughly disgusted. So that's the personal and professional side of me. But then I was also the co-chair of the Joint Committee. And so, of course, you can't be a loose cannon when you're in such a prominent position like that.
Right.
You have to be very respectful. And so that was a tough dance for me, right? Because as you and I've gotten to know each other over the years, Peter, you know that I'll call a spade a spade.
Yep.
And sometimes people don't like that. And I frankly don't care, right? I'm going to say what I know is the truth, and what and anything that comes out of my mouth is 99% of the time well thought out. There's the odd time where I regret what I say, but I think that's being a human being. But so, when I wasn't playing the role of the co-chair, I was very forceful in saying what was wrong. And thankfully, there's a lot of colleagues of mine across the country, probably a group of about 40 or so, with about 15 that did a lot of heavy lifting and political maneuvering. And even my friend Pierre Poilievre, that's how I got to know Pierre, who's now running for the Conservative leadership. He was very interested in understanding and becoming he really wanted to understand why this stuff was offensive. And to his credit, he jumped right in. And, so we helped educate what was wrong. And so long story short is that's been my journey. And I do like calling spades a spade. And today there's lots of spades that are spades. It's a crazy time out there.
Well, you changed my life, and let me just share with you a decision. I'm not living in Canada anymore. I'm not a resident of Canada. My wife, I joke, I'm the greatest salesman you ever meet. I convinced someone to leave La Jolla, San Diego for Toronto. But don't ask about buyer's remorse. I'm in San Diego today. So we were driving around. She was having us look at homes, and she said, you could travel back and forth. And I'm going, I don't know. It's comfortable in my life. And I'm driving around, and my phone starts going off as if the budget went out. When everybody sends from the scrum, they send like the notes. And I start reading this stuff, and I look at her, and I said, I was humoring her up until that moment. I said, maybe it's time. Like, that's the first thing I looked up after spending some time reading this. And then you put together your presentation, and you went across the country. And this is the part that really disturbed me. Not so much what the government did, the lack of Canadians who know standing up. So few. With your own dime, how many cities did you travel to when you were doing your education of the professional groups?
I think there's about 8 cities, if I recall.
So which ones were they?
Just thinking off the top of my head here. So Edmonton, Calgary, Lethbridge, Toronto, and of course a few surrounding suburbs in Toronto, Ottawa. Those are the ones that come to mind right off the top of my head.
Well, I showed up at your King Eddie event
In Toronto, yeah.
In Toronto. And King Eddie, for those of you who don't know, it's a very posh, beautiful hotel. And it's one of the premier hotels. Then you had a breakfast meeting. And when I walked in, the first thing I observed were the empty seats. And this was like a once in a generation, not once, never event changing, because was it the Carter Commission? Am I right? I don't, the one in 62, 63, where they said they were going to introduce capital gains tax and they made a big change, and it took 10 years for them to like bring in all the parties to actually figure out how they were going to make that transition. And this was how many days? 70 days that they were going to completely rewrite business. And I sat there in that meeting and I listened to and I learned, but what I really was learning is I was looking around the room and I was saying to myself, the Canadian leaders should be listening to this man, and this room is empty. And we all got the email, but they just went around doing their business and just complaining, but not doing anything. And you were doing something. And I remember you said something to me, and I don't know if you recall, but you said, Peter, if this goes through, I'm thinking about leaving. And I took that to heart. I took that to heart because
Actually, I don't remember that, Peter, but it sounds like me.
You did. You said, I'm leaving. And I had, for myself, I almost died in 2019. I was a typical man. I ignored my health. And while I was recuperating, I sort of like in a moment of weakness, I said to my wife, let's check out trying a year in San Diego. And little did I know that was going to be permanent. When I went back to Toronto, I was there for selling everything during COVID. I was there for 6 months. I'm lost for words, like what this government, this infrastructure has done to a country that I love. I just angry. Like I'm just, because I'm like you, Kim. It's Canadians are good, right? Like I you know, the Income Tax Act, like they don't arrest you and stuff like that. The IRS has an army, right? Like you negotiate, like and you know what I think? I think we bought into how great we were able to be taking advantage of our good nature. And that's why we're talking right now, because all the things like free money and all this stuff is just, they're anti-business. And I want to go back to 2017, because if you look at all the lockdowns and everything that's occurred, you could probably trace it to the federal Liberal government going back to when they first got into power, to like, yeah, this is what they were going to do to businesses, small businesses. Marno, his family company went public, so he was getting dividends. It didn't impact him. Right?
Yeah.
Justin Trudeau, he's got a trust fund from his daddy.
Well, let me just comment on a few things that you've laid out there. I do agree with you that the apathy that the Canadian public displayed, back at the King Eddie, was very disappointing. I think you and I have chatted about that. And I'll tell you some other ones, events that we did back then. Certainly in Calgary, we sold out. Now, in hindsight, not surprising to me. Like we had 300 people show up, a mixture of accountants and business people, and I was shocked. I was shocked that that many people showed up. But King Eddie, hardly anybody. And so it got me thinking over the years, and as part of this, getting ready for this conversation today, I knew we would talk about this, and I thought, well, why did that happen? Because that did hurt me, right? It's like, Jesus, why isn't anybody interested in this? Well, first of all, tax is boring, right? The average Canadian, the average person doesn't.
You're talking to a nerd. I think it's the most interesting. It's like you learn to play the piano and you can do music.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to a nerd as well. I think tax is fascinating, but when I start talking about tax at cocktail parties and family dinners, I become the boring guy pretty quickly, right? And so there's that element. Tax is just not that sexy. And the other issue is there's so much mythology on tax. I've said this example many times throughout my career. I've got family that are blue collar, and my wife's family's blue collar as well. And there's some of them have union jobs, and the mentality is, well, I don't want to work overtime. I pay more in tax than than it's worth. Right. And I think, and I say to them, okay, hold on a second. Do you honest to God think you pay more in tax when you're paid time and a half? Because let's figure this out. Do you know what the highest marginal rate is in Alberta? It's 48%. So that's the most you're going to pay. Simple concepts like that are just misunderstood.
It used to be 38%. No, it wasn't. Like
39 in Alberta. 39. Yeah, used to be, until we had our socialist government, and both federally and provincially.
Do you have sales tax now?
No.
Okay, at least that.
No. Yeah. So there's a bit of that, but it does, I think politically it does, there's elements of politics, obviously, that my real wake-up call on politics was during 2017, during that whole battle. And there's two significant wake-up moments for me. One is the West and Central Canada are very, very different politically. I always used to chalk it up that, there's differences, but holy cow, during that battle, it was very, very stark to me.
Give me an example of like the difference.
Well, the average, for the most part in Western Canada, entrepreneurialism is celebrated, right? If you're a small business owner, hey, thank you for taking the risk and providing jobs.
Yes.
It's celebrated because that's what entrepreneurs do, is they take risks, right? And it's the backbone of most communities. And whereas what I found, and I'm stereotyping here because there's lots of small businesses in Ontario as well, but just in the GTA area in particular, the appreciation is just not there. Instead, there seems to be, okay, what can the government do for me? Mentality. And again, I'm stereotyping here, but
no, I fully understand it, because just to put in perspective for you, because there is a strong independent. However, most of the accountants, unlike you represent your clients, you're an entrepreneur. Most of your colleagues, you treat them because they know tax with respect and everything, but they're not you. They they work at a big firm, right? They're living that way. I spent my entire life working with entrepreneurs because I lived like they did, and they spent their whole life, and this is a wake-up call for me, Kim. They spent their whole life trying to keep the government away from them. That's the whole job, was like a cold sore they didn't want to go off, right? That was literally it. And the wake-up call to me for that, and for a lot of Canadians too, but a lot of them say that they're too old to fight, right? Because they're done. Is that the government decided to come into their little realms. Like, they ignored the world. Like my last book was called The King of Main Street. I didn't call it the King of Bay Street or King of Wall Street, because the world happens on Main Street, and these are people, the kings and queens, who take the risk, who built an incredible lives for themselves, and they put themselves at risk And before I go back, I want to share with you, you were sitting on a panel with this gentleman. I don't know his first name. Is it was a Senate hearings. His name was Professor Wolfison, and he gave, I saw your face when he told this story about why should an entrepreneur get special tax treatment, because his son has worked for a startup and that company went bankrupt, and didn't his son take a risk because he wasn't getting paid? Yeah, his son was living in your basement, Professor, and that guy ends up moving back to his parents' basement, but he doesn't have a house, and his wife just left him. You know, that's like, well, like I'm sitting here going, like, how can you equate someone who works for someone who doesn't have like they're not an owner and taking a risk? Because you only get those true benefits when you start making money, right? Like you don't, like you're the last one to take a salary. When you started your firm and you guys were figuring and you had like what was happening, you took cuts. You're the one who took the risk.
Yeah, for sure. No, that was an interesting exchange. I mean, and you know, I certainly didn't agree with Professor Wolfson's points of view, and obviously my face gave myself away. But
oh yeah,
you know, but you know what I tried to say, if I recall correctly, that's 5 years ago. But was, listen, there's a significant difference between your son as an employee and an entrepreneur who risks their life savings, and should the tax system encourage people that take risks? Absolutely, they should. And we can debate exactly what that is, but to punish entrepreneurs, that's a completely different story. And that was the message I was trying to get across. Now, since that exchange, I've run across many academics and left-wing, think tanks and left-wing people in general who unfortunately believe that, look at Jagmeet Singh today. The guy there's probably not a day that goes by where, at least in recent months, where he's attacking companies who are making big profits. He attacked Loblaws the other day, saying that that they're making too much money. Like come on. It's so to go back, if I can, Peter, that was the first wake-up call, was just the difference between the differences between regions, Western versus Eastern, and just the misunderstandings of entrepreneurialism versus employee. And then the other wake-up call was, and this part just really struck me and made me quite angry and bewildered and befuddled that this could actually happen. Like, there was at the beginning, there was messages put out to try to support this proposed legislation that were just so clearly wrong. And so the tax community, including me, jumped all over it. And then the messaging would change. Here's an example. I started putting a facts versus myth thing together. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Yep.
And because I was getting really troubled, and I did it for my own benefit to start with, because I wanted to track the messaging. And so every time a message would come out that was wrong, I would call it a myth. And I would have, the message and I would have a hyperlink to that article. And then I would counteract it with what I call the fact, which is, and the one that really bothered me, the first time there's a message came out that said, a doctor who incorporates and makes $300,000 should not be able to pay less tax than a plumber. And I can't remember if they use plumber, but let's just say an employee who earns $50,000 a year or more, or $50,000 a year. And I remember my colleagues and I and others across Canada looking at that and saying, what the hell are we missing? And then after, 5 minutes, thinking, we're not missing anything. This is just wrong. And so, we start publishing and putting it out and saying, this is just factually impossible. This is wrong. And so, of course, the Prime Minister's office picks up on that. And the messaging then slightly changes. But to the average Canadian, it didn't change.
How did they change it?
So get this. So instead of being, an absolute statement like that, it was a doctor who incorporates and makes $300,000 a year should not be able to save more tax than the amount of tax that a 50,000 employee pays. So think about that comparative. So you have a $300,000 in a professional corporation. You're going to pay, let's say, 20% tax. Well, it'd be less than that, but let's say 15% tax.
Yeah.
Whereas if you paid it at normal rates, let's say 48% in Alberta, so 48 minus 15, whatever that delta is, I can't do math in my head, 28%, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that right? So 28% multiplied by 300,000. So that's the amount that you're deferring by keeping that, right?
Yeah.
It's not a savings, it's a deferral, first of all.
Right.
And then you compare that to a tax that an employee who earns $50,000 a year or more earns. Now, first of all, that's a ludicrous comparison because you've got one in the professional corporation that's a deferral versus a payment with so that comparative is ridiculous on its face. And does it make any sense? It makes no sense.
For me, I actually thought that the tax system for many years was brilliant. The fact that if you took the risk, your corporation, you were able to deduct, deferred, and then pay. And it was giving incentives. However, if you were to take your money out of the company to consume, you paid full tax.
Exactly.
And in essence, it just created money to build the economy. And I thought like Canada had over 1 million small businesses. There's 2.3 million, or there were like people who were contractors or consultants and things like that. And it was such a better system in the States because we also had healthcare, right? If you wanted to start a business in Canada, they supported you with tax. You didn't have to worry if your kid had diabetes that you wouldn't get coverage, right? Like Canada was to me, and this is why I'm so angry, because like I used to look at that and say, yeah, it's like they're promoting business. You can still be an entrepreneur and you can still be caring.
Yeah, I totally agree. But do you agree with my anger on the second part was just manipulate a few words so that you can retain the original message, which was wrong. But if you change a few words when it becomes correct, that the average Canadian and average person has no idea that you actually changed the message. And so the original message is retained that, these bloody doctors are paying less tax than $50,000. We got to fix that. That's just wrong. And of course, the media laps it up because they don't understand it. And so what makes me angry about that is that I saw numerous examples of that throughout that, and then continuing on to modern day today. And now this is not a new thing. It's just that happened to be the first time I experienced it in such a harsh way, and I continue to experience it.
Can I share with you? Because if you look at it being one-off, there's a greater agenda. And the fact is, like, they put in, like, there's idiots who are politicians, and if you listen to an idiot, that you're the bigger idiot, right? Like that's like, because look who the finance minister is. Like what? Like she doesn't even balance her checkbook, but she's the finance minister, right? Like, and you hear the prime minister, he's a trust fund baby. Like he never had a full-time job. So, but my point is, when you look at it isolation, and then you look at where they allowed large corporations to stay open, but they attacked the small engines of Canada. And then you look, and we've talked about this, you looked at, they decided in 2017, they decided to just go in and, attack small businesses, make these look like these greedy people who have this thing going on the side and they're taking advantage of the rest of hardworking Canadians. And then you look at what happened with the lockdowns, the fact that these were the people who were devastated by shutting down the economy so many times and changing the rules and everything. It almost looks like, you step back, you say, well, was it not coordinated? You know, was this not always the aim? And let's go make Canadians completely dependent. And if I were the devil, I wanted to destroy Kim Moody and every entrepreneur out there, to get those people like Wolfson who just basically line up at the trough and just eat what the government gives, right? Like, I would want to destroy these people. And I don't know if those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. You know, this is what the Soviets did. Like, the Tsar gave farmers their freedom and owned the land. And then when the Soviets came in, they demonized these farmers who were producing food, and they killed lots of them, and they put on people who knew nothing about running a farm, and you had 8 million people who starved to death. Like, history repeats itself. Go after the small independent people, and that's how you could have a dictatorship. And that, I'm very opinionated on this because I've studied history, and it's like, not everyone shows up in jackboots, but the results are the same.
Yeah, listen, you've done a lot more thinking on this than I have. I'm just a lowly tax guy, but
Yeah,
but certainly I have some strong opinions on.
Share them, Kim, whatever you feel comfortable.
Well, I put this on my LinkedIn account, you know, quite regularly, that the COVID lockdowns were so irrational on the whole. And I say this to my family and friends routinely. I do hope that history judges the lockdowns harshly. I have my doubts that they will, but I sure hope it does. Like some of the things that really attack the small business owner, who in my opinion, you know, disproportionately paid the price for these lockdowns. Like, I don't think it was in Alberta, if I recall correctly, but it was in Ontario, where they were shutting down, not shutting down, but they were restricting access to certain stores. You could only come in and get staples, and they had ropes around other areas where you couldn't get, like, let's say, hardware supplies or what have you. But meanwhile, Costco is open. Like, tell me that makes any rational, logical sense.
It doesn't make sense if you look at the individual parts. But if I step back and I say, I want to completely neuter all independents, and I want them to fall into a global plan, like, you know, getting rid of governments, I would attack the most independent people. And at the time, I just thought it was ludicrous that they were making those changes in 2017. But it was interesting, like, the progression, and it's cognitive. And I was in shock during the trucker event. I was really in shock when people who did something that was completely legal, exercising their free association, that they were told that they could have their accounts frozen. And as a Canadian, I'm going like, this is crazy. Like, there's going to be a run on the money. Like, this is, and I'm like sitting there going like, who are these people? Who put these lunatics in charge to do something like that? That, like, they spook the horses.
Of the Emergencies Act was a gross overreach of power, in my view. And again, I hope history judges this harshly. I have my doubts, but man, oh man, that was a gross overreach in my view.
You mentioned, when you were sharing a little about your practice, you have a U.S. cross-border practice. How did that explode after that edict went into being?
I got so many emails and phone calls. It was unbelievable. And what I tell people, you know, I haven't written about this, but that very act of invoking the Emergencies Act spooked everybody, right? It spooked the poor, the average Canadian, the wealthy Canadian, and the ultra high net worth.
Yeah.
I don't think the government could have done a better job of spooking an entire population along all those lines, right? Of course, you're going to get a segment of that population that are not spooked, and instead they're yay, good on you, go after those guys, which I think is unbelievably ridiculous. But all of the people that I just mentioned, like I'll give you an example. My mom was spooked because I think she gave $25 to the trucker fund, and there's some friends of mine that gave $50 or whatever in the hell it was.
Yeah.
Well, my mom is not a wealthy lady, but she was damn spooked that her accounts were going to be frozen. Now go all the way to some ultra high net worth people that we act for, and they didn't contribute, but they were sympathetic and they were close to contributing, and then it's all of a sudden they did what, and they're doing what? You know what, Kim? Find me a way to get my money the hell out of Canada. And we're, we're not. They don't want to become non-residents like you. Most of the people that have been, that have picked up the phone are a mix. I would say probably 95% just want their money out of Canada, and then the other 5% are find me a way out of Canada.
Yes.
And so, but what a brilliant move the government did to spook an entire segment of not wealthy, ultra high net worth wealth. I don't think they could have done a better job. So good on them.
I really don't think they're smart enough. Like literally, this is my thought. And it's just idiots were put into power. And I'll say this. I have a good friend, David Birchie. I don't know if you know David. David ran for the Liberal Party twice when the Conservatives were high, that you couldn't win, and he was in Ottawa. He's a lawyer, and David felt that he wanted to give back, so he decided to run for leadership just to raise his profile. Now, I'm not a Liberal, but on my taxes, what was I going to say? I'm friends with this guy. He's running, and I'm thinking, David, you'll be the only sane person. Well, what happened is, and there's a point to what I'm saying, he won his riding for the Liberal Party to represent the Liberals, and Justin couldn't stand him because he wasn't part of this idiot cabal. And what occurred was they took him out and they put General Leslie in, who is a complete, tool for NATO, and globalism. And the reason why I say that is because I don't really think now that we elect anybody because they're selected, because they went in and these people weren't going to play ball, so they just basically told them they couldn't run. Like Trudeau came in, or his people, and I'm friends with Kyle Kemper. I don't know if you know who Kyle is.
No.
I became friends with Kyle. Maybe it's a good thing I'm not in Canada. Kyle is the half brother of the current PM. He's the black sheep, and we did a really interesting interview. He was living near me a few months ago, and now he's moved. And he has, not in the conversation that we did it, because I wanted to be respectful. He mentioned that the people who circled around his brother, he was using some type of terminology from Lord of the Rings about this guy who was evil and manipulating the king and poisoning or whatever. And that was the character he was referring to, because I don't think they're smart enough. Literally, they've got advisors in there that are that they want this place to burn down. Like your mother, she was a good Canadian. Up until that moment, was she not like this is the greatest, like my mother, greatest country in the world? You know, for our American friends, Kim and I come from a country that has serious envy. We all get together and we talk about how Canada was better than America. That's what we do. And the fact is, this wake-up call came that maybe having a nanny state isn't so great. And that was a wake-up call. And your mother, it was personal at that point, right? She raised you. She did everything was right. She put you through school. You're a contributor. You have grandkids. Like she did the greatest investment of anybody can do. She's a mother, right? She made taxpayers. like you can't do, like, look how bad it is. Like I would have died in Toronto if this stuff didn't happen. And again, I share, you changed my life because all I could do is project of what the future was. And I want to share with you the year before, 2016, in around page 200 of the budget, they snuck in bail-ins.
They snuck in what? Sorry?
Bail-ins. You know how they were doing bailouts for banks?
Oh, yeah.
They snuck in bail-ins. And I'm reading it and I'm thinking Cyprus just happened and everything, but I was like, we have the best banks in the world. Like, look how we handled the 2008 crisis and everything. And that was a scam too, because they hid the mortgage crisis by getting CMC to take all the mortgages, the bad ones, from the banks. But because it was a quasi-government organization, they didn't show on the government's books. They took all that liability of the bad debt. But I read that and I'm going like, that's really interesting. If the banks go bankrupt, they can seize your bank accounts and they'll issue you shares of defunct financial institution. Why would they do that? Like, you know what I mean? When you look at things in isolation, you just say, oh, that's odd. But then when you start looking at these little things that they were putting in, you say, you know, this was sort of planned. This was planned. Tax the small business people, go and make it so that we can seize everyone's money, get them dependent, not working, lazy, not showing. Kim, but how many people can't find people who want to work because they make more money sitting on their ass now?
Well, it's still a pervasive problem. You know, during the early days of COVID, you know, they released that so-called CERB, Canada Emergency Relief Benefit, which, you know, the requirements for eligibility were pretty minor, pretty minimal, and paid $2,000 a month to people. And so, you know, a few months after that, it was in May, I was invited by the Conservatives to speak to the Human Resource Committee of the House of Commons. And I, you know, in my speech to the committee, I used my sister as an example. My sister is a great entrepreneur in Calgary here, and she runs a bakery, and it's a bakery and a farmer's market. The farmer's market is only open 4 days a week, Thursday to Sunday. And so these part-time bakers that she hires, you know, they make a decent living, but they're working part-time. And at the front end of COVID, you know, when everybody was shutting down, my sister thought, holy cow, I could lose my business here, so I better shed salary. So she laid off a good chunk of her bakers, but it turned out that, of course, staples became rather high in demand. So bread, and all of a sudden she needed her bakers back, right? So she tried to hire the bakers back. Well, the bakers basically said, well, no, we're not coming back. We're making more sitting at home than we would working for you. And so I talked about that example, and I called it CERB vacation. I said that these bakers are on CERB vacation. And so, and you know, I've gotten to know over the years by appearing through these committees that, yeah, of course they don't listen to you. It's all theater, and whatever comments they can get on the record and Hansard. And so when it came time for questioning, you know, one of the Liberal smartasses said, you know, I won't say his name just out of respect, but he said, yeah, Mr. Moody, during your presentation, you mentioned CERB vacation. that these bakers are on. Can you tell me specifically where they're going? Like,
We can't go anywhere. I had a client actually explain something because he did really well because he was a manufacturer of something that was needed and the government was pushing that industry. So huge growth. And he shared with me, he's gone fully automated. He's ordered several really expensive multi-million-dollar machines from Europe and the reason was he couldn't find anyone. And then he used the example. He pays like $23 an hour or something, which was really good in Toronto for someone not skilled, someone who was just, going to a drill press, right? And he said, well, if you had a husband and a wife and they have like an adult child, that's $72,000 a year. Why would they want to get on the bus? And why would they want to pack lunch? And why they're getting paid more to sit at home? And he said, I can't find anybody. And not only that, there's a major crisis that no one talks about in Canada. The height of the baby boom in Canada was in 1959, a year after than the United States. But Canadians did not do what Americans did. The baby boomers, they didn't have kids. And Kim, you're a Generation X, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
What year are you?
68.
Okay, I'm a 69er. So you know as well as I do, they kept on closing schools when we were showing up. And then it wasn't until Trudeau Sr. said, well, we have no kids. So he basically opened up the floodgates for immigrants. Do you remember, like later on, probably like 84, 85, and since then, it's just been ratcheting up. So the people who own everything are now, and the biggest bulk of the boomers, they're retiring next year and the year after. They're going to be retired. There's no workforce anymore. So you've got this huge, and we don't have, well, Canada's been good in bringing young people there, but if you have a social system and you pay them as soon as they get there not to work, they're going to do what every other Canadian does. They're not going to work.
Yeah, the Fraser Institute published a short briefing on this about a couple of weeks ago, if I recall correctly, and the two main causes of labor shortages, at least in Canada, they're asserting to is exactly what you're saying, where retiring baby boomers are leaving the workforce in droves, and then secondly is too much money in the system vis-a-vis generous government supports. When they stopped CERB in October of 2020, all they did was just make the EI system, the employment insurance, way more generous than it should be, in my view. And so there's still a lot of generosity and government supports out there, and which is making it very, very difficult to find, unskilled labor, if you want to call it that. And
well, it's a problem. Even skilled labor. I had an opportunity. I did a lot of work with Morty Shapiro in the accounting field. And they used to bring me in because they had to find alternatives to having someone buy you out, especially at a large firm. And what's happening now is Pac-Man's happening with all these companies, you probably see this with all these CA firms where they're starting to join BDO, MMP, Grant Thornton, RSM. They're doing Pac-Man. But I remember sitting down with a partner who was the largest independent company, like CA firm in Canada still, and it merged with a very large firm. And what happened is the partner structure looked like this. And they had no Gen Xers. Like they had like 8 or 9, 10 partners at the top, and they had maybe 3 or 4 Gen Xers. Why would I, if I'm going to join a firm, why would I mortgage my house in my future to pay someone who's been promised to be bought out as a partner, right? Because anybody who's smart is a business person. They say, well, like it's a doctor. Why would I buy if I'm a GP, an existing practice? If I open my own, I already have 3,000 patients, right? That's the same thing that I saw. And that was the issue that, Morty was pointing out. He was saying, people don't want to buy practices. Did you know Morty Shapiro?
No.
So he actually he went to school with my father was a CA in 63. So Morty was like way back.
I know the name. I just don't know him personally. So
what he ended up doing is when right after graduation, he started training people for the UFEs,
Yeah.
for the examinations. And then he did that from like 1967 all the way to like 1987. And he was a business consultant to accounting firms. But that was something that we were noticing in the early 2000s, that nobody wanted to, none of these people wanted to join, to become partners. And on top of that, they were lazy. I grew up with a tax accountant. My father was a tax accountant. And I knew that from January to approximately the end of June, I really didn't have daddy. Like maybe I would see him, and that's a tough life. And a lot of these younger people are saying, I just work for industry. I make the same amount and I don't have to worry. And I'm sure you're seeing that in your field right now.
Well, we certainly do see that, Peter. You know, I was having lunch with a colleague of mine recently, and you know, again, I'm stereotyping because there's always exceptions, and we're lucky to have some exceptions within our firm. There's some great teammates we have, but you know, I look even within my kids, and I love my kids dearly, but do they have the same work ethic that I do? Not a chance, like not even close. And I like to think I provide them a pretty good example, like your dad did, right? To you, and there's no shortage of examples I see within my kids' friends as well, and so. It's a challenging issue, which has been compounded and made worse by this whole work from home mentality as well, which, you know, don't get me going on that. I think that's a ridiculous thing. And but in any event, it's a challenge, but I do think that it's going to correct itself. At least that's what the glass half full, you know, Kim Moody thinks, and you know, just take some time. So.
I look at it for myself. There's no half empty, half full. It's like, I'm thirsty. I have to drink whatever there. You just got to. You have to move around where like your cheese is moving. You have to change. Getting back to small businesses. I had a friend who is teaching at Schulich, and he was sharing with me that most of the good entrepreneurs are immigrants, because like the baby boom happened because these returning veterans grew up during the Depression. Now they had a little extra cash. Therefore, you know, having more kids, you know, wasn't going to change their lifestyle. And a lot of people, they have a sense of hunger. And a lot of Canadians don't have that hunger because the government's taken away from them. And those who have, or business owners, entrepreneurs, are being attacked. What advice would you give to somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur in Canada, and is there still a value to within the Income Tax Act for them? Are they being rewarded still?
You know, I think careful review and good advice can get you some rewards, because it hasn't been completely shut down, thankfully, although certainly the opportunities are diminished a lot. You know, unfairly in many cases because of the July 2017 proposals, which were thankfully watered down, but they're still very, very damaging. So the advice, to answer your question, that I would give aspiring young entrepreneurs is, you know, find yourself a peer group, because, you know, I don't know about you, Peter, but I have a commerce undergrad degree, and I naively thought that, you know, when I get my undergrad degree, I'm going to be a business expert. I'm going to be, you know, I'm going to know how to run a business just like my dad did.
Yeah.
You know, and then all of a sudden I get the shiny certificate when I got my undergrad degree, my commerce degree, and it's like, I don't have a damn clue. And then when I started my own firm, you know, I didn't know shit from Shinola, as the old saying goes, but at least I had the courage. And, you know, I look back and I was pretty naive in the whole scheme of things, but the one thing I'm really, really grateful for is early on in my entrepreneurial days, I found a group of like-minded entrepreneurs who I latched onto. And you might know the group. It's a group called Strategic Coach.
Is that Dan Sullivan?
Yeah, it's Dan Sullivan. So I entered his program in 1998. So it's been 24 years now, 24 and a half years. And I can tell you, there is now, obviously, 24 years later, there's other entrepreneurial coaching programs as well. But this particular one I really, really like because it does get other entrepreneurs together.
Yeah.
And you grow up together, and you have a whereas, you get your degree.
Yeah.
And especially today, I mean, I look at some of the business schools, most of the professors have zero, and I mean zero, entrepreneurial experience, right? And you get these people that are graduated that have very, very different ideologies from what entrepreneurs have.
Yeah.
And so my recommendation is find, I waited 6 years into my entrepreneurial life, 5 years into my entrepreneurial life to find an entrepreneurial coaching and mentor group. My suggestion would be find it day one, because it's worth way more than any undergrad or master's in business administration will ever provide.
Great. Became lucky. I became friends with the international president of YPO.
Oh, awesome.
It's like I did an interview with Sean. I'll send it to you. And that organization, the fact that sometimes you can't speak, you can't take your breastplate off to your employees and say, hey, we're about to go bankrupt, and the resumes are going out and stuff like that, or you're having challenges with work. So you want to go to someone who's your peer. And on top of that, someone who's not invested. Like if you're like going to, let's say, your spouse and say, we're just about to lose the house, like that's a bit of the person can't really give you an open ear because it directly impacts them. Yeah. And a lot of business owners are isolated. So I agree with you about joining a peer group. And I also think, early on in your career, you decided to put yourself out there and become a leader within the tax community in Canada. Like you were young back when you joined STEP and all that stuff. Are you
calling me old now, Peter?
Well, you are old. You're like a year older than me, right? So I thought we were the same age,
but you raise a good point. I mean, when I volunteered, and I still like volunteering, but now my volunteer efforts are, go beyond just tax and other community initiatives and what have you. But when I volunteered, it wasn't to receive anything in return. It was because I was so damn grateful of the considerations that I had received as a result of my education and the support. And so I went into it with the right state of mind. I'm going to volunteer because I'm grateful, and I want to show my gratitude. And I had no expectation of return whatsoever. Well, I can tell you, Peter, the what I've gotten back has been way more than I ever put in. And what have I gotten back? I can't tell you all that I got back, other than satisfaction. Sure, there's some recognition, but I don't care about that.
Right.
And did I get monetary returns? Hard to say. Certainly, did I get some more clients because of name recognition and involvement? Yeah, probably. But really, I can tell you, I think if you don't go into volunteer activities or trying to build your community or giving back or have some sort of sense of gratitude, then you're missing out.
Well, one of the things I mentioned earlier, the part where really to me that separated you from almost everyone else in the tax community is you put yourself out there. And you were mentioning that there were other people, like 40 accountants out of 68,000 accountants across the country. There were 15 who were basically said this is ludicrous. Like the fact that you put your neck out there, and not only did you put your neck out there, you put your dollars there, because definitely the return in Toronto was nothing, and the King Eddie is expensive, right? So and I say that is really important. Now, I don't know if you had a chance to read my book, but I read over 250 books on male aging. And I thought that was important because I I was going through that stage, and I started very immaturely. I was thinking I like to know my prey. You know, like we were younger, so we want the wealthy guy to, like, you know, give us a lightsaber and all that stuff. And then I realized the difference between the eater and the eaten is
Tell me.
time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And in the first half of life, what inspired me to write that book is I would hang out on Fridays with some of the most wealthiest people in Toronto and powerful builders, and they would meet on Fridays. And there was this gentleman, he was worth maybe $5-6 billion, and he was angry, and he knew he was dying. He wasn't telling anybody, and he was going there. He was trying to, you know, maybe give off his wisdom and whatever, but he was still running the first half of life. And the first half of life is accumulation, titles, and, you know, basically what he, you know, I'm a gathering things, you know. And then later on, and you've seen this because you deal with some of the most successful people, not just financially, but ones who've given themselves. They understand the second half is opposite from acquisition. It's giving it back.
Yeah.
Because you can't take it with you. Because one of the things that this gentleman that I'm talking about, he didn't deal well with his demise. And yes, he did some planning, but he didn't do a sophisticated will. And there's a huge fight happening right now. We're talking billions of dollars, right? It's a disaster. And he was angry because he was running the first half of life of, like, and he didn't know how to switch. And I realized when I would hang out, I said, you know, he's definitely not going to listen to me, so maybe I can write something that actually would tell them, like, because I'd read, you know, I just read, and as I read, I realized that I'm going to become that old guy, right? I'm going to be that old guy who gives unsolicited advice, and that's how you know you're getting old, right? There's a young guy, and you give him unsolicited advice, and that's what a healthy man does. And I understand women do that too. However, there's also this initiation to eldership, which doesn't happen in our society. And the reason I wanted to interview you, Kim, because I think you've done a phenomenal role being that elder in the community, and the fact that a true elder would hit his stick down and say no to the powers that be, right? And it's like, whatever the consequences are, you know, and that, because I'm sure you didn't make friends with the federal liberals when you actually went to battle for business men and women across the country.
No, I didn't. But you know what's interesting, just as a quick aside on that,
yeah,
is what one tactic I did is I put together a short memo on one of the messaging that was released by the PMO's office, and I thought this is so disgusting. I have to put a memo together, and I got to find a way to share this with the Liberal caucus. And so one of the Conservative members said, well, this is how you reach them, because here's how their private email addresses are configured. And so I had my assistant cobble together all their private email addresses based upon that convention.
Yeah.
And then I sent out the memo. Well, of course, I didn't get any response from the cabinet ministers, but I got about 11 phone calls, not emails, phone calls, from some of the backbenchers. And these backbenchers were wanting to understand, which was interesting, right? Because, like you said, if you do the right, well, that's how I live my life. I mean, I do the right thing, and regardless of the consequences. I'm not scared of the consequences. And yes, I might take some lumps for that, but that's okay. At least I can live myself and go home and say to my kids, this is what I did today. And I can look you in the eye and know that was the right thing. That's my measure of character, right? So to know that there is about 11 backbenchers that reached out to me, and it wasn't all political at that point, gave me a little bit of hope, right? Which was, and even today, thinking about that, there's some of them have already retired, but there's a few of them that are still backbenchers, and they're interesting people. So anyhow, just as a quick aside.
Well, so Kim, your practice again focuses on Like, what if I wanted to go and access all the wonderful advice, because I would actually say it's earned wisdom and advice, what are the services I would turn to your firm?
What we're trying to build, Peter, is a suite of professional services that the high net worth, ultra high net worth person needs. They need tax advice, and in most cases, they need Canada-US advice.
Yeah.
Because there's some sort of connection in the United States, either investments or kids or some sort of connection to the United States. They need trust and estate advice. In other words, they need a will, and they got to make sure it's sound, and there may be trust in their entities. They may want to go to the United States, or they may have family members that might want to come to Canada. So there's immigration issues. Maybe they're expanding their business, or they need corporate and business law advice. So that's our law firm on the traditional side, and then on the non-traditional side in the law firm is renouncing U.S. citizens.
Right.
They may be a U.S. citizen living in Canada, and they may have no allegiance to the United States, and they're sick and tired of what it means to be a United States citizen from a tax perspective. So we'll help them renounce their citizenship. So that's our law firm. The accounting firm, of course, goes with traditional accounting services that most high net worth, ultra high net worth people need. They need financial statements and tax returns for their entities, and sometimes bank reportings and things like that, and valuations. And so that's our firm.
Excellent. Well, you're a leader in the field. And Kim, I want to thank you so much, because I think we covered a breadth. And I think right now it's something that people need to hear, and something that I wanted to hear. We're going to have other people who watch this, especially colleagues of ours, but I want people to know that I was the audience. Me. I asked the questions. All those guys at Step, I got to ask the question. I got to the mic first.
Well, I appreciate your kindness as always, Peter, and thank you for your kind words about me and my career, and all the best to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.